During a brutal Viking winter, one faced freezing temperatures in an unforgiving environment. There were no shops to buy food or necessities. Death from exposure during winter's worst weather was a constant threat. You ate what you produced or wore what you made to survive the chilling winter climate. In such a weather-dependent environment, the consequences of a poor harvest or being unprepared meant certain peril during the harsh winter season. Therefore, Vikings had to adapt, cope, and be very practical. So, how could you keep warm without central heating or furnaces? What did you eat when crops could not be grown? In other words, what did Vikings do to survive a medieval winter? Viking longhouses, built for a medieval winter. Vikings survived the bitter winter season through their well-constructed longhouses. These long, narrow refuges from the harsh climate were mostly made from timber. They were built as one long main room, enclosed by timber walls which were insulated with turf or thatched straw, wattle, and daub. Essential heat was provided by a long, narrow open fire pit lined with stones or an open hearth, which provided warmth throughout the longhouse. These heat sources were also used for cooking purposes. Smoke passed through ventilation holes in the curved roof, with this design keeping the warmth from residual heat inside. Tables for eating and beds for sleeping were placed nearby for comfort. Floors were often covered with reeds or rushes. Warmth during the medieval Viking winter. In the depths of a medieval Viking winter, warmth was essential for survival. But where to find it? The open fire pits inside longhouses and insulated timber walls were important for warmth. In addition, many longhouses were a combination of house and barn under one roof. In these arrangements, people resided in one area and the penned animals in another. Animal body heat would be greatly appreciated as a source for warmth, even though the noise and smell would be minor inconveniences. At nighttime during the winter season, Vikings slept under layers of furs and blankets. People also huddled or gathered together when practical to share body heat. On those occasions one did venture outside, limiting time outdoors was a practical way to lessen the chilling effects of winter weather. Clothing made for a medieval Viking winter season. To protect themselves against freezing wind and snow, clothing worn by Vikings had to perform well under harsh weather conditions. Men wore woolen tights or leggings and woolen tunics. This clothing used wool's great properties as an insulator and protector against wetness, moisture, wind, and cold to keep them warm. Fur-lined leather boots and shoes were often greased for further weather resistance. Underclothing made of linen was worn by both men and women. In addition, men and women layered their winter clothing, adding or removing garments according to winter climate conditions. Care had to be taken with overexertion while wearing these clothing layers in wintertime. If one perspired too much, they would take off the sweaty undergarments to dry while their body cooled down. Afterwards, they would dress again in the dried linen underclothing. Hats, shoes, and gloves were sourced mainly from animal skins. Large woolen cloaks, sometimes lined with fur or just fur skins, would be worn by men and women over their clothing layers when required with these chilling temperatures. Wool sourced from sheep was made into clothing by women. These skills were crucial to surviving the winter season. The intense labor used to produce, spin, and weave this wool by housewives deserves special mention, as these materials were vital for Viking winter survival. Women dressed in apron-like woolen dresses, draped over their shoulders and held in place by decorated brooches. Similar to men, they wore woolen tights or leggings to preserve warmth. Food for a medieval Viking winter. Farming was a key source of sustenance for Vikings, though how could you grow food during the bleak winter months? This is why food preparation and storing enough provisions for winter was never far from a Viking family's mind. In order to survive the chilling winter season, they preserved food gained from growing, hunting, and fishing in warmer months. Grains like rye and pulses were dried, then stored in airtight vessels and containers. Meat and fish were air-dried, salted, or smoked for preservation. Meat could also be preserved in a brine solution for consumption during winter. An ample supply of firewood was gathered in summer and early fall months for the longhouse fire pit during winter, as well as fodder for animals at that time. Livestock would provide essential vitamins during the winter season through products like cheese, eggs, and dairy. Vegetables, as well as meat, could be pickled. Root vegetables like turnips and carrots were stored in cellars. These foods could be used for high-calorie intake and to provide protein through meals like hearty stews. Nevertheless, stored and preserved food was not the only winter nourishment available for Norsemen. To supplement their diet, Vikings would venture outdoors to ice fish and hunt for game like birds, rabbits, and reindeer in the snowy landscape. These animals also provided fur and hides for clothing and warmth. Supplementing their stored food was crucial to ensuring there was enough nourishment to last until early spring. Water supplies came from dug wells, nearby running water, or snowmelt when possible and stored. Dairy whey or buttermilk from livestock was also consumed for liquid refreshment. Mead, a fermented honey drink, often accompanied food or feasts during the long winter season. Entertaining during a medieval Viking winter. Even during a medieval Viking winter, life was not all about struggle. Winter evenings were long and dark, making boredom and depression a constant threat to one's mental health. To relieve these issues, Norsemen adapted their daily routines. Storytelling of epic sagas and great tales was a popular seasonal pastime. Playing table and dice games helped to lessen depression and illness. Crafting, spinning wool, and women weaving cloth helped to pass away time in a practical manner while indoors. When enjoying time outdoors, children would build things like snow forts and have snowball fights. These activities taught them skills for warfare like combat, cooperation, and competition. Ice skating, using sharpened shin bones made from deer or oxen, was another favorite winter pastime. During the winter season, Viking men repaired and maintained their longhouses, cared for their livestock, and made tools for the spring farming season. In addition, they would enhance and develop their combat skills through training. Such physical activities kept them fit while generating crucial body warmth. Wintertime for Norsemen was also a period for quiet reflection. Community, hospitality, and transportation during a medieval Viking winter. Community-focused gatherings helped Vikings cope with the long dark days of the winter season. This included being a generous host to both expected and unexpected guests, providing warm clothes and hearty food for winter travelers. Feasting celebrated community spirit and socializing to combat isolation. Vikings used sleds and skis to go over their snowy landscape and for hunting. Today, people enjoy many winter activities when snowfall comes, though having food and necessities at our disposal has made wintertime pleasurable compared to a freezing Viking Age winter. During the spring season of the year 1003 AD, 9 Native Americans were at peace in surroundings of nature, sleeping under their covered canoes in wilderness silence. Suddenly, they were awakened with a start. A group of strange pale men with shiny weapons appeared. They captured and killed all of these Native American men except one. This survivor ran back to his village, where he alerted his community about the horrific assault. On this day, 2 cultures that inhabited different continents with no prior knowledge of the other made their first encounter. The Viking desire to settle new lands had no limits other than conventional means. From their homelands they looked westward, establishing themselves in Iceland around 874 AD. Erik the Red settled Greenland around 985 AD, giving the region that name to entice settlers. There they would establish 2 main settlements. Then, during 986 AD, Bjarni Herjolfsson spotted land further west after drifting off course from his intended destination of Greenland. However, he did not disembark and explore this new land, though word of his new sighting spread over time, eventually reaching the ears of an explorer named Leif Erikson. In 1000 AD, 15 years after Bjarni's sighting, Leif Erikson, son of Erik the Red, visited this new world with 35 men. During his explorations, places like Helluland, possibly Baffin Island, Markland, possibly Labrador, and Vinland, possibly Newfoundland, were visited on his voyage. There were no encounters with Native Americans, and they returned to Greenland after spending the winter season. It would be 3 years later that another expedition visited this land, led by Thorvald Eriksson, brother of Leif Erikson. It was this group of Vikings, led by Thorvald Eriksson, who attacked these 9 Native Americans in 1003 AD. These innocent victims were probably from either the Beothuk people, ancestors of the Algonquin, or Thule, ancestors of the Inuit. The Norsemen refer to these Native Americans as Skraeling. It is assumed Vikings gave Native Americans and Inuit in Greenland this name because of the dried animal pelts they wore. When the expected counterattack arrived, these Vikings were waiting aboard their beached ships. By the time these Native Americans ended their siege, the Vikings had lost their leader, Thorvald, who was fatally struck by an arrow. After burying him in this strange new land, they returned to the Viking establishment founded by Leif Erikson just a few years before. After spending the winter season there, they returned to Greenland. Nevertheless, this was not the last of Viking visits to North America. A few years later, Thorfinn Karlsefni reached Vinland with 3 ships and over 150 people. The following spring, Native Americans came upon their location in Vinland. When they motioned a desire to trade for the shiny weapons of these Vikings, they were denied because of strict orders from Thorfinn. Instead, the Vikings did offer to trade milk from their livestock and red cloth. The Native Americans seemed to appreciate drinking this strange beverage and traded their animal pelts to gain milk and cloth. Later, a number of Native Americans with more pelts came to trade. What happened next has conflicting accounts, though according to one version of events, a Norse bull came loose from the woods, frightening the Native Americans. These Native Americans quickly left in their boats, though it would not be the last time the Vikings would see them. Days or weeks later, they returned to attack the Vikings. The Norsemen fled to the forest for a more defensible position, where they killed a number of Native Americans while enduring a couple of casualties themselves. These Vikings spent the winter season in Vinland. The following spring, 3 years after first arriving, they departed for Greenland. These accounts were based on information from the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Erik the Red. These sagas are thought to have been written in the early 1200s and are known as the Vinland sagas. Nevertheless, we know these sagas are not completely correct and are used to provide a point of reference for events on which little evidence exists. Fortunately, Longhouses in Newfoundland is one settlement that proves Vikings reached North America. It was located in 1960 by Helga and Anstein Ingstad from Norway and is the only confirmed Norse site in North America. During their time in North America, Vikings may have launched excursions as far south as the states of New York and Maine from this settlement in Newfoundland. Recently, the Viking presence in Newfoundland was given further attention. With the aid of tree rings from wood cut at the Longhouses Viking settlement, scientists are now confident enough to add a date, 1021, for this settlement. They were able to arrive at that date by using a solar storm which took place in 992 AD as a reference point, along with the aid of an atmospheric radiocarbon signal. Knowing the effect of the solar storm on tree rings, they calculated the number of rings from that solar event to determine the year 1021 AD. These researchers state that even the wood itself was felled by metal objects. Furthermore, these scientists state their findings are not a suggestion that 1021 AD was the only time the Vikings were in Newfoundland. They suggest this was likely one stage in their habitation, and that Vikings could have been here years before or years after 1021 AD. What it does show is that the former assumption of 1000 AD could also be just a stage, and perhaps not the initial contact Vikings had with North America. So, why did the Vikings, a feared people who made their presence felt throughout large parts of Europe, abandon Longhouses after approximately 20 years? Various researchers suggest, along with the sagas, that strong resistance from their encounters with Native Americans played a large role. The sagas also suggest Viking settlers were concerned for their safety and freedom with the Native Americans, as well as internal conflicts. However, researchers today are trying to discover more evidence-based answers. At this time, medieval to modern will ask these questions as potential possibilities. Could North America have been too remote for sustainability, since even Viking settlements on Greenland were not self-sufficient? Perhaps there was a natural event like lack of food in a harsh and challenging environment which made living there impractical. Or, since Vikings were always looking to explore new lands, perhaps the Longhouses site was intended as a base for further journeys and not a permanent community. Thinking outside of convention, medieval to modern has another theory. Could it be that not all the Viking settlers returned to Greenland, continuing their stay in other undiscovered locations? In addition, could these possibly remaining settlers have assimilated into the native North American population over time? This may be similar to a theory on another famous abandoned mystery settlement in North America, the Lost Colony on Roanoke Island in North Carolina. The second Roanoke colony, known as the Lost Colony, was established in 1587 AD. Its settlers suddenly disappeared from their fortified site by 1590, with the true cause of their departure still a mystery to this day. Though there is speculation that the approximately 120 inhabitants assimilated with the nearby native population. Some information to support this claim has appeared in writings from as early as the year 1605, but it is only one of various theories. As research evolves, evidence may prove more spectacular findings on the Viking presence and contact with Native Americans. Various other sites may remain hidden at present or evidence lost to the ravages of time. And what about related mysteries? For instance, we still do not know what happened to the 1121 AD expedition by the Bishop of Greenland, Erik Gnupsson, which tried to reach the Vinland destination in North America. Were they successful? And where exactly was Vinland, since the descriptions and sagas are not a certain match to Longhouses meadows, especially with evidence of butternut wood found at that site? Those trees do not grow that far north, the closest location being nearly 500 miles south in New Brunswick or in the St. Lawrence River Valley. Recently, there has been increasing interest in the possibility that contact between Vikings and Native Americans could have gone beyond landing and meeting in North America. Considering a study by Spanish and Icelandic researchers, a Native American woman may have accompanied the Vikings to Iceland on their return over 1,000 years ago. They say it is not conclusive evidence, though it definitely is proof of interaction. Through a genetic analysis of 80 people from 4 families residing in Iceland, they discovered a DNA type normally found in Native Americans or East Asians. This DNA was introduced into their gene pool through a woman. It is important to state that these families descend from ancestors living in southern Iceland between 1710 to 1740 AD. Since Iceland at that time was isolated from outside contact, the distinct possibility is that this woman was introduced into the population by Vikings. In addition, this lineage of DNA is one of the few related to North American settlement over 14,000 years ago. Today, there is insufficient information to show a direct genetic linkage between Native Americans and Icelanders. This is due to no current native North American group possessing a matching genetic variation to that found in these Icelandic families after 1,000 years. Therefore, the Native American group this DNA originated from remains a mystery. Viking contact with North America could be missing another possible New World encounter. The lost Vinland voyage of the Viking Bishop Erik Gnupsson is a great mystery in the exciting history between Norsemen and North America. Erik Gnupsson, also called Henrikus, was born in Iceland. During the year 1112 AD, he was appointed by Pope Paschal II as the first bishop with jurisdiction over Greenland and Vinland. While based in Gardar, Greenland, Erik Gnupsson was active in the conversion of both the native population and settlers. Then, in 1121 AD, he began a voyage he needed to make with great urgency. Currently, here is where the mystery of the lost Viking Bishop voyage to Vinland begins. Despite limited information, the expedition of Bishop Erik Gnupsson has drawn increasing interest because of its potential implications for both Viking and North American history. This is why the vital question of what happened with the bishop's voyage to Vinland needs to be answered. We know the Church was aware of Vinland's existence decades before the appointment of Erik Gnupsson by Pope Paschal II. This was due to the fact that Adam of Bremen, the German medieval chronicler, mentioned Vinland in the document titled Deeds of Bishops of the Hamburg Church. This chronicle was written between 1073 to 1076 AD, where he mentions the following information. Start of quote. Moreover, he, Seven Estridsson, king of Denmark, spoke of an island in that ocean beyond Iceland that has been discovered by many, which is called Vinland, for the reason that vines grow wild there, which yield the best of wine. Moreover, that grain unsown grows there abundantly is not a fabulous fantasy, but from the accounts of the Danes, we know to be a fact. End of quote. After reading this quote, a number of interesting implications may be learned. First, Adam of Bremen mentions Vinland was discovered by many, which suggests in those times, Vinland was not visited on a few isolated journeys. Next, even with this information, there was no attempt to establish church administration for Vinland until 4 decades later. This leads medieval to modern to ask if during that period, Vinland grew enough to justify becoming part of a diocese. By implication, could the establishment of more than one settlement in Vinland have justified Pope Paschal II's decision? Erik Gnupsson probably heard a few stories about Vinland while residing in Iceland, further sparking his interest with this New World location. Since 986 AD, when Bjarni Herjolfsson spotted land further west after drifting off course from his intended destination of Greenland, Vinland was always part of Viking visions for settlement. Therefore, it is not beyond possibility that additional undiscovered Vinland Viking settlements exist. After all, until the 1960 discovery of Longhouses meadows by Helga and Einstein Ingstad, the fact that Vikings had made contact with North America was hotly contested and denied by many. Today, we know it was fact, just as the Vinland sagas and other sources indicated centuries before. Now that the information leading up to the departure of Bishop Erik Gnupsson from Greenland in 1121 AD has been revealed, why did he undertake the voyage? Medieval to Modern will now present 3 of many theories currently held by various researchers which attempt to answer that question. Of course, without evidence, none of these theories are fact, though these interesting speculations try to explain the bishop's motivation for his lost voyage. The first theory suggests there were settlers in Vinland that had already converted to the Catholic faith. These residents of Vinland aided with the supply of timber and other natural resources to Greenland, as that colony was not self-sufficient. Since Vinland was still being mentioned by Adam of Bremen in 1073 AD and in 1112 AD was named as part of a church jurisdiction, this indicates ongoing settlements existed. Otherwise, why would the church establish jurisdiction over a location with no residents? Furthermore, they suggest that since the days of Leif Erikson, who first visited Vinland around 1000 AD, a Viking presence has survived there for decades. These Viking residents remained despite the departures of fellow settlers, first encounters with Native Americans, and internal struggles. Therefore, as part of his administrative duties, Bishop Erik Gnupsson was called to Vinland for missionary work and looking after faithful followers residing in Vinland. The second theory we shall mention concerns practical matters. According to some researchers, there is information about Erik Gnupsson writing to the bishopric of Iceland that he wanted to go to Vinland and investigate issues related to the regular supply of timber to Greenland. Even from the time of Leif Erikson, Markland and Vinland were known to host an abundant supply of timber. Greenland at that time could have been desperately in need of resources, and the bishop had to make the journey to secure what was required. The third theory deals with clerical matters. Erik Gnupsson was compelled to visit Vinland because of followers requiring his presence for a number of reasons. These included loss of faith by some settlers, a need to convert fellow Norsemen, and dealing with an increase in pagan beliefs by some settlers with an aversion to church faith. This theory also suggests there was no significant intention to convert Native Americans, as relations were still quite tense. Having presented a number of reasons for the lost voyage of Viking Bishop Erik Gnupsson, we can now mention a few theories concerning the outcome of this voyage. Let us immediately state the obvious one, which is that the ship never arrived in Vinland, having been lost at sea. Since there is little to no evidence to confirm this fate or any other theory, it remains a possibility. The next theory we will mention assumes Bishop Erik Gnupsson did arrive in Vinland and stayed on with an existing Vinland settlement. There he remained for the rest of his days, resigning his post in Greenland and doing missionary work in the New World until he passed on. A third theory offered by some researchers states that Erik Gnupsson stayed on for a while in Vinland before returning to Gardar. Furthermore, it is suggested that he relinquished the bishopric through a letter to Greenland in 1122 AD before either returning there or staying on in Vinland. In the former case, they say Erik Gnupsson assumed a lesser role in the church upon return, which is why nothing further is written about Erik Gnupsson in Icelandic chronicles or church documents. As for further evidence concerning this mystery, we do know that in 1124 AD, the bishopric of Iceland sent a new bishop to Greenland named Arnold. This was in reaction to a request by the Greenland settlers. He was the first official bishop of Greenland, residing at Gardar. Curiously, nowhere is a date of death for Erik Gnupsson officially given, or is there any documentation stating he passed on. According to information from sagas, the last recorded voyage to Vinland for supplies of timber was in 1347 AD. It was noted to be a small ship from Greenland, which had sailed to Markland. Then, upon its return voyage, it encountered rough seas and had been driven off its intended course and onwards to Iceland. This information suggests there was regular contact with the New World locations of Markland and Vinland, at the very least for gathering supplies and resources. The fact that this voyage would not have even existed in an Icelandic chronicle if these Greenland voyagers had not come off course is of particular relevance. This information suggests voyages to Vinland could have happened for decades, unnoticed or documented by anyone. In the future, researchers may discover spectacular findings concerning the lost voyage of the Viking Bishop Erik Gnupsson and the Viking presence in North America. Various settlement sites may remain hidden at present, waiting to be found. though it is exciting to consider that if evidence of what happened to Erik Gnupsson is found, we may also find the true location of the Vinland settlement. The great Viking warrior Rollo, also known as Rolf or Roland among other names, is a historical figure whose life is shrouded in mystery. Rollo is assumed to have been born around 860 AD in either Denmark or Norway, though even these details are not known with certainty due to a lack of written information about him. Rollo's father is thought to have been a nobleman or jarl, and thus from an early age he was trained to be a great warrior and leader of people. These would prove to be valuable skills during his adventurous life. Tragically, when his father passed away and his brother was murdered, Rollo was forced into exile. To clarify an important detail, let us state that Rollo was not the brother of Ragnar Lodbrok in Old Norse, as no factual evidence exists to back such a claim. During his exile, Rollo became a mercenary in foreign lands and eventually arrived in England, looking for a lord to serve. It is assumed that during this period he gained the nickname Rollo the Walker, because no horse could carry his tremendous size, weight, and strength. There he formed a bond with Guthrum, the Danish Viking chieftain, and also became a part of the Great Heathen Army. Guthrum and the Great Heathen Army were defeated by Alfred the Great at the Battle of Edington in 878 AD. Soon after, Guthrum was baptized as Athelstan, and his army went onwards to East Anglia. There, Athelstan began his reign as King of East Anglia in 880 AD. It is said by various researchers that witnessing Guthrum's conversion to Christianity and its customs would later make Rollo less opposed to Christianity than the majority of pagan Vikings. At this time, Rollo would begin forming his own following of warriors. Using cunning tactics, they captured Rouen in northern France around 876 AD. It is thought by various researchers that Rollo used this area as a base for conducting raids while increasing his presence in the region. This area had been subject to continuous Viking raids during a period when West Francia lacked sufficient capabilities to defend against such attacks. In 885 AD, Rollo led his following to meet Siegfried for a planned invasion of Paris. They were joined by other Vikings from various locations to form a huge attack force. They began their invasion in northern France, sacking and pillaging along a terrifying path of devastation towards Paris. When the Vikings arrived at Paris in November, they placed it under siege. This marked the beginning of an arduous and bloody struggle. Following months of various unsuccessful tactics by the Vikings, King of West Francia Charles the Fat eventually encircled them in October 886 AD. However, rather than attacking them, the king allowed these Vikings to sail past Paris and onwards to raid Burgundy, which was in revolt. Following this Paris siege, little is known about Rollo and his activities. However, raids in northern France by Vikings likely persisted. Then, early in the 10th century, Rollo once again seemed determined to increase his Viking presence in the area around Rouen. At last, the French king was moved to act on this aggression, and in 911 AD, Rollo was defeated at the Siege of Chartres by the French army. However, instead of offering the usual terms of paying these Vikings to leave the area, West Francia King Charles the Simple made a different offer to Rollo. In return for the lands around the mouth of the Seine and Rouen, Rollo and his followers would guard this territory against future Viking invasions and convert to Christianity. After thoughtful consideration, Rollo eventually agreed to these terms. Various researchers say Charles the Simple was shrewd in this action because this territory would act as a buffer for his kingdom, helping to preserve it during a vulnerable period. In addition, to seal the agreement, Charles' daughter Gisela was offered for marriage to Rollo. Furthermore, under the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte in 911 AD, Rollo pledged allegiance to West Francia King Charles the Simple and became known by the Christian name Robert. Though when it came to the condition of kissing the foot of the king, Rollo refused, ordering a subordinate to do the deed instead. When they attempted to lift the king's foot, he fell to the ground. Nevertheless, after this oath, Viking attacks up the Seine River came to an end and Paris was saved. As for Rollo, he began restoring, improving, and reforming his new territory, which would become the Duchy of Normandy. In time, Rollo began to divide the land among his chieftains, working to restore law and order to this territory. Eventually, Normandy became France's most orderly region of the period. When Charles the Simple lost support from his nobility, he was deposed and replaced by Robert I of France. Though Rollo remained true to his oath to Charles and fought with him at the Battle of Soissons in 923 AD. Their alliance did kill the new King Robert I of France at this battle, though they lost the fight. A short time later, Charles the Simple was captured. He died in the year 929 AD while imprisoned in a tower. During this period of French struggles, Rollo set about expanding Normandy. In 924 AD, he was conceded the areas of Bessin and Maine by the successor to Robert I of France. Rollo's son William Longsword succeeded Rollo to rule Normandy in 927 AD. William Longsword's mother was Papa of Bayeux, who is assumed to have most likely been either the daughter of Count Berenger II of Neustria or a common woman captured by Rollo at Bayeux between 886 to 889 AD. According to some historic accounts, as Rollo neared his passing, he began losing control of his mental faculties. It was noted that at one point he reverted to his pagan upbringing by sacrificing 100 Christian prisoners to the Norse god Odin. Then, in what appeared to be a case of conflicting spiritual beliefs, he also gave 100 pounds of gold to the clergy, honoring his Christianity. Rollo, a Viking leader who formed the foundation for the Duchy of Normandy, died sometime between the years 928 and 932 AD. This territory would eventually be known as Normandy, or Land of the Northmen, by the Franks. His descendants would not have the same conflicts with faith that Rollo did, becoming committed Catholics within a couple of generations. They even adopted Frankish dialect while dropping the use of Norse by the end of the 10th century. In time, through intermarriage with neighboring lands, Rollo's descendants increasingly assumed Frankish customs. Still, the French regarded them as Normans. Normans would play an increasingly important role in European history as decades moved forward. Frankish war tactics of heavy cavalry and castle building would be used to great advantage by the Normans in their later conquests. These included the accomplishments of William the Conqueror. From his land of Normandy, he would invade England to become its king in 1066 AD. Frankish customs served the Normans well in feudal politics, making the Duchy of Normandy a solidly governed and prosperous region. Thank you for supporting us at Medieval to Modern. Please be sure to watch another episode shown at the end of this video. Also be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. I wish you good tidings, as we remember that sharing knowledge has been a noble deed throughout the ages.